I can fix it. A black waitress heard a billionaire CEO's cry. Then she taught him what he couldn't. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. It's a tale that's going to surprise you. A story of redemption, transformation, and unexpected lessons. This one takes place in a high-end restaurant in New York City, a place where only the rich and powerful are seen. Imagine walking into a room where the chandeliers shine brighter than the future for most people, and the finest food is served on plates worth more than a car. A place where every inch of marble reflects the ambition and wealth of those seated at the tables. Now, picture a scene where the world is going on around you. And yet, for one man, it all comes crashing down in an instant. That man was Samuel Drake, a billionaire CEO known for his ruthless business tactics and for always being in control of any situation. He was the kind of man who walked into a room and immediately commanded attention, not just because of his wealth, but because of the sheer presence he exuded. But tonight, something was different. Tonight, Samuel Drake was not in control. As he sat at the table, surrounded by his top investors, something inside him began to unravel. His usually sharp mind, so accustomed to making billion-dollar decisions in a second, felt foggy. The pressure was too much, the constant deals, the sleepless nights, and the unrelenting expectations. In the middle of a conversation about the company's future, something snapped. Samuel couldn't speak. The weight of his own success, the cost of his decisions, all of it hit him at once. And in that moment, as his hands trembled and his throat tightened, Samuel Drake, the man who had once conquered the world with a few words, broke down. He sobbed quietly, trying to keep it together, but it was clear, the man who had everything had lost something he could never buy back, his peace of mind. But what happened next would change everything. In the background, unnoticed by most, was Elena Simmons, a waitress at the restaurant. Elena wasn't anyone special in the eyes of the guests. She was just another face in the crowd of waitstaff, quietly serving the rich, unseen and unheard. But there was something about her that set her apart. She wasn't just serving food. She was watching, listening, observing the room, understanding the power dynamics at play. She had learned over the years that in places like this, people with money often assumed they could get away with anything. They treated her as invisible, a mere servant. But Elena had learned something important from years of living in the shadows. Sometimes, being invisible gives you power. As Samuel's sobs filled the room, Elena walked up to his table. She didn't speak right away. She simply stood there, waiting for the right moment. She had seen the pain in his eyes, something no one else had noticed. Everyone around him was too busy talking about business, too wrapped up in their own success, to see that the man they admired was falling apart. Elena could have walked away, ignored the situation, just like she had done countless times before. But something in her told her this was different. This man needed help, not from his investors, but from someone who had nothing to gain from his wealth. She gently touched his shoulder, and Samuel looked up, his face streaked with tears. Without a word, she sat down beside him. "You're not alone in this," she said, her voice calm but firm. Samuel stared at her, confused. He had been surrounded by people all his life, people who were always willing to say whatever he wanted to hear, but no one had ever truly listened to him. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Elena didn't answer right away. Instead, she simply said, "I can fix it." Her words weren't just a promise to help him with his current problems. They were a reminder that sometimes, the help we need doesn't come from where we expect it. Elena had seen it all. People who were afraid to show vulnerability, people who thought money could solve everything. But in that moment, she knew the most valuable thing Samuel Drake could learn wasn't about making more money or closing more deals. It was about understanding what really mattered in life. She wasn't here to fix his business. She was here to help him fix himself. As Samuel sat there, still shaken by his outburst, Elena's words hung in the air between them. He could barely process them, the weight of his emotions still too raw. But Elena, calm and composed, just sat there beside him, waiting. She wasn't in a rush. She had seen this before, not in billionaires, but in people. In broken people. People who had everything but still felt empty inside. Samuel was one of those people. "What are you thinking?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Elena didn't immediately respond. She looked around the room, noting how no one seemed to care. The staff moved quietly between tables. The guests sipped their expensive wines and whispered among themselves, too absorbed in their own lives to even notice the CEO, who had once ruled with an iron fist, now crumbling before her. "You're not the only one who's had to hide their pain," Elena finally said, her voice steady but filled with an understanding that went far beyond what Samuel expected. "People like you. People who are always in control, they forget that it's okay to break down sometimes." Samuel didn't say anything at first. His mind was still racing. He had been taught his entire life to never show weakness, to always project an image of strength, of success. But tonight, for the first time, that armor he had so carefully crafted was starting to crack. "What do you want from me?" he asked, his words coming out sharper than he intended. Elena didn't flinch. She simply looked him in the eye and said, "I want you to stop pretending that you have everything figured out. I want you to start facing what you've been avoiding. Because you're only going to keep falling if you don't." Samuel blinked, stunned by her bluntness. No one had ever spoken to him like this. Not his business partners, not his closest friends, not even his family. Elena's words, simple as they were, cut through him in a way he hadn't expected. "I've been there," Elena continued. "I know what it feels like to be invisible, to feel like your worth is based on what you can do for other people. But you're not invisible. Not to me." Samuel's mind raced as he processed her words. He had always prided himself on his ability to control situations, to manipulate outcomes, to stay ahead of the curve. But here he was, vulnerable, exposed in front of a waitress. And for some reason, that made it harder to breathe. "What if I don't know where to start?" he asked, his voice softening. Elena smiled faintly, her eyes kind but firm. "Start by being honest. Start by admitting that you don't have all the answers. You're a smart man, Samuel. You've built a fortune from nothing, but you're still running from something. Until you face it, nothing will change." Samuel felt a shift inside him, a small crack in the wall he had spent his whole life building. "I've spent so much time hiding behind my success," he admitted quietly, his voice almost a whisper. "I've pushed people away. I've hurt people, but I don't know how to fix it." Elena didn't respond right away. Instead, she reached out and gently placed a hand on his. Her touch wasn't forced or awkward. It was comforting in its simplicity. "You don't have to fix everything all at once. But you can start by doing the right thing. By being the person you've been afraid to be." Samuel looked at her, and for the first time in a long time, he felt something shift inside. It wasn't a magical fix, it wasn't a sudden revelation, but it was a moment of clarity. Elena didn't have all the answers. She wasn't some life coach or guru. She was simply a woman who understood the power of facing your demons. And for some reason, that made all the difference. "I don't know if I can change overnight," Samuel said, the weight of his past decisions heavy in his voice. "But maybe I can start trying." Elena gave him a nod of approval, a silent acknowledgement that he had taken the first step. "That's all anyone can do," she said. The two of them sat in silence for a while, the buzz of the restaurant continuing around them, but for once, it felt like they were in a world of their own. Samuel was still reeling from the unexpected honesty of the conversation, but he felt a flicker of hope. For the first time in years, he was looking at things differently, not through the lens of power, but through the lens of vulnerability. And it felt right. As the evening wore on, Samuel sat at the table, the weight of his conversation with Elena still fresh in his mind. It was as if a veil had been lifted, revealing the person he had been hiding from for so long. He couldn't remember the last time he had been so vulnerable, so raw, so human. The power he once had felt empty, insignificant compared to the feeling that was beginning to stir within him now. Elena, on the other hand, went about her work, quietly moving between tables, serving the rich and powerful with a calm professionalism that was almost second nature to her. But there was something different about the way she walked now, a kind of quiet strength that Samuel couldn't ignore. As he sat there, still processing what had happened, he noticed her again, really noticed her. She wasn't just a waitress. She was a woman who had faced her own struggles and had come out stronger on the other side. He felt a sudden urge to ask her more, to understand how she could be so composed when the world around her seemed to be constantly shifting. Elena didn't know it, but in that moment, she had begun to change his life. "I never thought I'd be sitting here," Samuel finally said, breaking the silence. Elena paused for a moment before turning to face him. Her expression was gentle, but she didn't offer any immediate words of comfort. She simply waited for him to continue. "I've spent my whole life chasing after success, building this empire, thinking that if I just kept moving, kept working, I'd eventually find peace. But all I've found is a constant need for more. More money, more power, more control," he said, his voice filled with a mixture of regret and realization. Elena nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. "I get it," she said softly. "It's easy to think that way. We're all told that if we just have enough, if we just achieve enough, we'll be happy. But it's not true. You can't buy peace. You can't buy happiness." Samuel leaned back in his chair, taking in her words. He had spent so long trying to buy everything that he thought would bring him happiness, but now he was beginning to see how hollow it all was. "I think I've been running from myself for so long," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've ignored the things that really matter. The relationships, the people I've hurt, the things I've sacrificed. I've been so focused on building an empire that I forgot what it meant to be a person." Elena didn't say anything right away. She had heard these kinds of confessions before, from people who had lost their way. It was a common theme among those who had everything but still felt like they had nothing. But what was different about Samuel was that he was acknowledging it. He was willing to face the truth. "You're not the only one who's been running," Elena said quietly. "But it's never too late to stop. It's never too late to change. You just have to start somewhere." Samuel looked at her, her words sinking in. He didn't know where to begin, didn't know how to fix everything he had broken, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like it was possible. "I don't know how to fix things," he said, his voice filled with uncertainty. "But I want to try. I don't want to keep living like this." Elena smiled, her eyes warm with understanding. "That's all anyone can do. Try." It was simple advice, but it was the truth. Samuel realized then that he didn't need to have all the answers. He didn't need to fix everything in one fell swoop. What mattered was that he was willing to try. That was the first step. And for the first time in his life, Samuel felt like he could take that step. He didn't know where the road would lead, but he knew it was the right direction. Elena's presence had reminded him of something he had forgotten. A simple truth that had been buried under years of success and ambition. He didn't need to be perfect. He didn't need to have all the answers. He just needed to start. The night passed slowly as Samuel and Elena continued to talk, sharing stories and insights. Samuel found himself listening to Elena in a way he never thought possible. She had a wisdom about her, a perspective that he had never considered before. It was as if she could see through the surface of things, through the masks that people wore, and she wasn't afraid to speak the truth. As the evening came to a close, Samuel realized something important. He had started to change. It wasn't an overnight transformation, and it wasn't easy, but it was a start. And that was enough. As the days passed after that pivotal conversation, Samuel couldn't shake the feeling that something inside him was starting to shift. The rest of his life had been a series of high-stakes deals and business conquests, but for the first time in a long time, he found himself thinking about things outside of profits and success. It wasn't easy, and he didn't have all the answers, but he knew one thing. He couldn't go back to the way things were. Elena had opened his eyes to a world he had long ignored, a world where people mattered more than the bottom line. But even though he was trying, there were still moments when the weight of his decisions pressed down on him. One evening, Samuel sat alone in his office, the city lights twinkling outside the windows. The room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning and the faint sounds of the city below. It was in this quiet that his mind began to race. He thought about the countless employees he had fired without a second thought, the contracts he had pushed through without considering the human cost, the relationships he had sacrificed for the sake of his empire. He had always justified it by telling himself that success required sacrifice, that the greater good meant pushing through the hard decisions. But now, those decisions felt hollow. He felt disconnected from the very people he had worked so hard to impress. He thought about Elena again. She was so different from the people he was used to being around. She didn't care about his wealth or his status. She saw something in him that no one else had ever bothered to look for. And it wasn't just that she cared. It was that she was willing to speak the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it was. That was something Samuel had never encountered before. He needed that. He needed someone to tell him the hard truths. It was something he had been running from for so long. And in that moment, he realized something else. He needed to make it right. He couldn't undo all the harm he had caused, but he could start somewhere. The next day, Samuel called Elena into his office. The room felt different now, the weight of the decisions he had made in the past still hanging over him, but he was determined to face it. "I've been thinking about what you said," he started, his voice quieter than usual. "I've spent my whole life thinking I was in control, that I could fix everything with money and power. But I've lost something along the way. I've lost my humanity." Elena looked at him, her expression calm but knowing. She had seen this before, this struggle to reconcile the person someone was with the person they wanted to become. "It's not about losing who you are, Samuel," she said softly. "It's about remembering who you were before all the noise and the success took over. You're still in there. You just have to find your way back." Samuel nodded, her words hitting him in a way he hadn't expected. He realized that she was right. He didn't need to fix everything at once. He didn't need to make grand gestures or dramatic changes. He just needed to start with small steps. Over the next few weeks, Samuel began to make changes in his life. He reached out to former employees he had wronged, apologizing for the way he had treated them and offering to make things right. It wasn't easy, and some of them were hesitant to accept his apologies, but Samuel didn't back down. He knew that this was part of the process. He also began to shift the way he approached business. Instead of focusing solely on profits, he started to consider the impact his decisions had on people's lives. He asked himself how each choice would affect his employees, his clients, and even the communities where his company operated. It wasn't always an easy shift, but it was a necessary one. One afternoon, Samuel invited Elena to lunch. The two of them sat in a quiet cafe, the sun filtering through the windows, casting soft light across the table. It was a simple meal, nothing extravagant, but it felt like a moment of peace. "I've been trying," Samuel said, his voice tinged with both determination and uncertainty. "I'm not perfect. I know that, but I'm trying to be better. And I want to thank you for being the person who didn't let me hide anymore." Elena smiled, a soft, knowing smile. "You're welcome," she said simply. "But remember, this is your journey. I'm just here to walk with you for a little while. The real work is up to you." Samuel nodded, feeling a sense of gratitude and clarity wash over him. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew one thing. He was no longer running from the man he had been, nor the man he could become. And that, he realized, was the first step toward truly changing his life. Weeks went by, and Samuel continued to reflect on his decisions and the changes he was slowly implementing in his life. It wasn't always easy, and there were moments when doubt crept in. The weight of his past actions still lingered, but he no longer felt the need to hide from them. Samuel began to rebuild his relationships with the people who had once worked for him, reaching out to former colleagues and employees to apologize for the way he had treated them in the past. He knew that his past actions couldn't be undone, but each apology felt like a step in the right direction. He even found himself visiting some of the communities where his company had caused harm, listening to the people who had been affected by his decisions. As he walked through those neighborhoods, seeing firsthand the impact of his choices, he felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility. But he also felt a deep sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the opportunity to make things right, even if it meant starting from scratch. One afternoon, Samuel invited Elena to join him for coffee. They sat in a small cafe near the office, the warm sunlight spilling through the windows, creating a peaceful atmosphere. Samuel felt a sense of calm as he sat across from her, knowing that this woman, who had once been just a waitress to him, had become someone he deeply respected. She had challenged him, made him confront his flaws, and in doing so, helped him find a path toward redemption. "I've been thinking," Samuel began, his voice thoughtful. "I've spent so much of my life focused on success, on building this empire. But I've never stopped to think about the people behind the numbers. I've never truly understood what it means to make a difference in someone's life." Elena listened quietly, sipping her coffee. She had always known that Samuel's journey was going to be long and challenging, but she also knew that he was on the right path. "It's a process," Elena said softly. "It's not about getting everything perfect overnight. It's about doing the best you can, one step at a time." Samuel nodded, taking in her words. He understood that change wouldn't come easily, but he was determined to keep trying. He had come to realize that his wealth and success weren't the most important things in life. What mattered was the impact he had on the people around him, the way he treated others, and the way he used his resources to help those in need. That realization didn't come all at once. It had taken time, patience, and the courage to face the uncomfortable truths about himself. But now that he had accepted them, he felt a sense of peace that he had never experienced before. Samuel continued to make changes in his business, placing more emphasis on social responsibility and giving back to the communities that had been overlooked for so long. He started investing in programs that helped local schools, provided health care for underserved populations, and created opportunities for young people to find meaningful employment. The more he worked on these initiatives, the more he felt fulfilled. It wasn't about making headlines or receiving accolades. It was about knowing he was doing something good, something that truly mattered. One day, as he was walking through one of the communities he had been working to support, Samuel saw a group of young people playing basketball in a newly renovated park. It was a small project, but it had made a big difference in the lives of the kids who now had a safe space to hang out, away from the dangers of the streets. Samuel watched them for a moment, and then he smiled. This was what he had been searching for, something real, something lasting. He knew he had a long way to go, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was on the right path. Later that day, Samuel received a call from his team. They had finalized a new partnership with a nonprofit that focused on environmental sustainability. The project was ambitious, but it had the potential to change the way his company operated, making it more eco-friendly and reducing its carbon footprint. Samuel smiled as he listened to the details. It was a reminder that even in business, there was always room for growth, for improvement, and for doing things the right way. He knew this partnership wasn't just about profit. It was about making a positive impact on the world. As he hung up the phone, he felt a sense of pride. He was no longer just a billionaire CEO building an empire for himself. He was someone who had started to build something that would last, something that could make a difference for others. And that, Samuel realized, was the true measure of success. Months passed, and Samuel had come a long way from the man he once was. The changes he had started making in his life weren't just for show, they were real. He had become more involved with the communities his business impacted, investing in their future, not just through donations, but by creating lasting change. His company was now focused on more than just profits. It was focused on people. He had begun to transform his image from a ruthless businessman to someone who understood the responsibility that came with wealth and power. Samuel was no longer just another CEO in a suit, making decisions from an office that seemed miles away from the people his company affected. Now, he was out in the field, talking to people, hearing their stories, and genuinely understanding their struggles. The transformation wasn't easy. There were still moments of doubt, moments when his old self tried to resurface, whispering that he should push harder, take more risks, make bigger deals. But Samuel had learned to ignore those voices. He had learned that true power didn't lie in accumulating wealth. It lay in making a real difference in the world. One evening, Samuel stood in front of a group of young entrepreneurs he had been mentoring. They were part of a new program his company had launched, one that aimed to help young people from disadvantaged backgrounds get the resources and mentorship they needed to start their own businesses. It was one of the most rewarding projects Samuel had ever worked on. As he spoke to the group, he saw something in their eyes that he hadn't seen in a long time. Hope. Hope that they could do more, be more, and change their own circumstances. "You're the future," he told them. His voice strong and full of conviction. "Your ideas matter, and with the right support, you can make a real impact. Don't ever let anyone tell you that your dreams are too big. I've been where you are, and I can tell you that the only limits you have are the ones you put on yourself." As he finished his speech, a young woman in the front row stood up, her hand shaking slightly. Samuel recognized her instantly. She had been one of the first to sign up for the program and had shown a fierce determination to succeed. "Thank you for believing in us," she said, her voice full of emotion. "Your story, it gives us hope that we can change things, that we can do things differently." Samuel smiled, feeling a sense of pride that he hadn't felt in a long time. This was what he had been working toward. It wasn't about building an empire anymore. It was about helping others build their own. After the event, Samuel met with Elena at a nearby cafe, their usual spot. It had become a place of peace for him, a place where he could reflect on everything that had changed and everything that still needed to be done. Elena had been his steady support through it all. She hadn't asked for anything in return, but Samuel knew that she had played a major role in his transformation. "I never imagined I'd be here," Samuel said, taking a sip of his coffee. "I thought success was all about power, about winning at any cost. But now I see that the real success is helping others rise, helping them reach their potential." Elena smiled, her eyes warm. "You've learned what it really means to lead," she said. "It's not about telling people what to do. It's about showing them the way, supporting them when they need it most." Samuel nodded, a deep sense of gratitude filling him. He wasn't the same man who had walked into that restaurant months ago. He wasn't perfect, but he was better. And that, he realized, was enough. As they finished their coffee, Samuel's phone buzzed. He looked down at the screen and saw a message from his team. "The partnership with the nonprofit has been finalized. We're launching the new environmental initiative next month." Samuel's heart lifted. This wasn't just another deal, it was a step in the right direction. It was a chance to make a real difference in the world. He looked at Elena, a smile spreading across his face. "This is just the beginning," he said, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. Elena smiled back. "I think it's only just getting started." And for the first time in a long time, Samuel believed it. He had found something that mattered more than wealth, more than power. He had found a way to leave a legacy that could truly make the world a better place. Samuel's life had taken an unexpected turn. The once cold and calculating businessman, driven solely by wealth and power, had been replaced by a man who now understood the true value of his actions and the impact they had on the world. As he stood in front of the small group of young entrepreneurs that had gathered for their monthly meeting, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride. These were the people he was now working for, not just for their success, but for their growth, for their ability to make a difference. He had come full circle. These young men and women were now the future of the company, the future of the industries that had once only been driven by profit. And Samuel was there to guide them, not as a boss, but as a mentor. "You're all here for a reason," Samuel said, his voice steady but full of conviction. "This isn't about just making money. This is about changing the world. You have the opportunity to build something lasting, something meaningful. Don't waste it." As he looked around the room, he saw the faces of people who were ready to take on the world. They were hungry for knowledge, for wisdom, and most importantly, for a chance to create something of their own. Samuel had been given that chance. Now it was his turn to pass it on. Later that evening, Samuel found himself sitting across from Elena once again. The cafe had become their regular spot, a place where Samuel could reflect and take stock of everything he had accomplished and still wanted to do. It wasn't much, just a small table by the window, but it was here that Samuel had found peace in a world that had always been so focused on power and success. Elena had been by his side through it all, helping him navigate his transformation, offering her support without ever asking for anything in return. Samuel knew that without her, he might never have found the courage to change. "I'm proud of what we've done," Samuel said, his voice quieter now. "But there's still so much more to do. I don't think I'll ever be finished." Elena looked at him, her gaze steady, yet filled with a quiet understanding. "You're on the right path, Samuel. And the fact that you know there's more to do is what will keep you moving forward. It's never about reaching the end. It's about constantly improving, constantly learning." Samuel nodded, taking in her words. They had always been true, but it wasn't until now that he truly understood the depth of their meaning. His entire life, he had been chasing after something: money, success, recognition. But now, he was learning to chase something deeper: meaning, purpose, and impact. He had learned that there was no true end to success. Success was not about crossing the finish line, but about the journey itself. "I know I can't undo everything I've done," Samuel said, his voice full of quiet resolve. "But I can make things right, one step at a time." Elena smiled, proud of the man he had become. "That's all anyone can do," she said softly. As they finished their coffee and stood to leave, Samuel's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw a text from his team. "The new project is ready to launch. The Community Development Initiative is going live next week. We're making it official." Samuel smiled. It was the culmination of everything he had been working toward. the opportunity to make a difference, not just in business, but in the world. He felt a sense of pride and excitement, knowing that this was just the beginning. He wasn't the same person he had been when he first walked into that restaurant months ago. He had learned, he had changed, and he was ready for whatever came next. Samuel stood tall, a man transformed, and as he looked at Elena, he knew that he had found something far greater than any business deal or success he could ever achieve. He had found his purpose. Samuel stood in front of the new community center, his heart full of pride. The ribbon had just been cut, marking the official opening of a project he had poured his energy into for the past several months. This wasn't just a building. It was the physical manifestation of everything he had learned about true success, everything he had come to value. The center was a space where young people from the local community could come and learn, receive mentorship, and find resources that would help them succeed. It was a far cry from the corporate boardrooms and high-rise offices he had once spent his days in. This was where real change would happen, one life at a time. As he watched the children and teenagers excitedly run around, checking out the new basketball court and computer lab, Samuel couldn't help but feel a deep sense of fulfillment. This was the legacy he wanted to build, not one of empty skyscrapers and fancy cars, but one that mattered, one that made a difference. He had spent so much of his life focused on amassing wealth and climbing the corporate ladder, but now he saw the truth. The ladder wasn't what mattered. It was the people you helped along the way that left the most lasting impact. It was the lives you touched. As he stood there, Elena appeared beside him, her calm demeanor offering a quiet reassurance. She had been there through all of it, every step of his journey. When he was overwhelmed, she reminded him of his purpose. When he doubted himself, she reminded him that change was a slow process, but it was always worth it. She had seen him grow in ways he never thought possible. Samuel smiled as he turned to her. "I never thought I would be here," he said, gesturing toward the bustling center. "I thought I was meant for something different. Something bigger, something more corporate. But this," he paused, his words filled with emotion. "This feels right." Elena's eyes softened as she looked at him. "You're doing the right thing, Samuel. You've built something far greater than any business empire." Samuel nodded slowly, taking in her words. "I've spent so much time thinking I needed to be the top dog, the one in charge, the one calling the shots. But now, I realize that it's about empowering others to take those steps, to lead. That's real power." They stood together for a moment, watching as the young people engaged in various activities. Some were playing basketball, others were attending workshops, and a few were simply chatting with mentors. Samuel could see the difference this place was already making, and it was just the beginning. The impact was bigger than he had ever imagined, and it filled him with a sense of peace. He could already see the future, one where the next generation would have opportunities he hadn't had, the kind of support that would allow them to reach their full potential. The smile on his face reflected the pride he felt, not for himself, but for the young people whose lives would be changed by this center. "What's next?" Elena asked, her voice calm as always. Samuel thought for a moment, watching the energy of the kids around him. "More? We need to do more," he said. "This is just one community. There are so many more that need this kind of support. This is just the beginning. We can't stop here." Elena smiled, proud of how far Samuel had come. "You're going to make it happen," she said, her confidence in him unwavering. Samuel knew she was right. The road ahead was still long, but now he was ready for it. He wasn't alone in this anymore. He had a team, a community, and most importantly, a purpose. For the first time in his life, he felt like he was truly living out his values, making decisions based on something bigger than himself. And that was the legacy that mattered. As the sun began to set, casting a warm golden light across the scene, Samuel felt a quiet sense of gratitude. This journey had changed him, and in turn, it was changing the world around him. He knew there was still so much to do, but he was no longer afraid. He was no longer chasing after something he couldn't define. He had found it. And with that, he stepped forward, ready for the next chapter of his life. One that would be written not in corporate earnings, but in the lives he touched, the futures he helped shape. As Samuel stood at the entrance of the community center, he couldn't help but reflect on everything that had led him to this moment. The man who had once defined success by how many zeros were in his bank account, the man who measured worth by power and status, was no longer the same person. He had learned that true fulfillment didn't come from accumulating wealth, but from the impact he made on the lives of others. And now, standing before the place that symbolized his transformation, Samuel knew he had found something far more valuable than any business deal or corporate merger: a sense of purpose. Over the past year, he had built more than just this center. He had built a new life for himself, one grounded in the values of kindness, empathy, and community. The change hadn't been easy, and there were times when he doubted himself, but the progress he had made was undeniable. This community center, filled with young people who now had a safe space to learn, grow, and dream, was proof that he had made the right choice. Elena stood beside him, her presence as steady as ever. Through every step of his journey, she had been as constant, offering guidance and support without asking for anything in return. She had seen the potential in him when he couldn't see it in himself. Samuel turned to her, a look of deep gratitude in his eyes. "I never would have gotten here without you," he said softly. Elena smiled, the warmth in her eyes reflecting the pride she felt for the man he had become. "You did it yourself, Samuel. All I did was remind you of what you were capable of." Samuel nodded, knowing she was right. It had been his decision to change, his willingness to confront the truth about himself, and his determination to make things right that had truly made the difference. And now, standing in front of the thriving center, he realized that the work wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The center was already changing lives, offering opportunities to young people who had once been overlooked. But Samuel knew there were still many more communities out there that needed the same support, the same hope, the same chance to succeed. He had built this foundation, but now it was time to expand it. Samuel looked out across the center, watching as the young people engaged with their mentors and peers. Some were working on projects, others were in the computer lab, and a few were chatting with local business leaders who had volunteered their time to help guide them. It was a beautiful sight, young minds filled with possibility, eager to build their own futures. "This is just the beginning," Samuel said, more to himself than to Elena. He knew that if they wanted to make a real difference, they had to keep pushing forward, keep striving for more. There was no finish line. There was only the next step, the next community to help, the next person to uplift. Elena looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "You've learned that it's not about reaching the top. It's about lifting others up along the way," she said. Samuel smiled, feeling a deep sense of peace. This journey had taught him so much. It had taught him that true success wasn't about being at the top. It was about helping others rise, about leaving a legacy of kindness and generosity. As the evening sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the center, Samuel felt a quiet satisfaction settle in. He wasn't the man he used to be, and that was a good thing. He had become someone who cared, someone who understood the true meaning of leadership. He had found his purpose, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like everything in his life had come full circle. The power he had once sought wasn't in control or money. It was in making a positive impact on the lives of others. And that was the legacy he would leave behind. Samuel took one last look at the bustling community center, the laughter and excitement of the young people echoing in his ears. He knew that the work was far from over, but he was ready to face whatever challenges came next, ready to continue building, not just an empire, but a future that mattered. With Elena by his side, Samuel was finally living the life he had always been meant to lead.